maybe we can just start our conversation, and then other folks will get here when they get here. Would you guys like to just do some quick introductions of yourselves and your organizations? And oh, I should say, I'm Shanti Gonzalez. I'm the Senior Manager of Candidate Recruitment and Training at the League of Conservation Voters. And today we're just going to talk about some of the considerations for folks who are considering running for office. But we had an election last night, and so I also invited our speakers just to share reflections and as they introduce themselves, and then we'll dive into some of our considerations for folks who are considering running for office. So Ruby, you want to lead us off?
Sure. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being with us. My name is Ruby Powell Dennis, and I serve as founder and executive director of Elect Black Women PAC. We are a national organization that is committed to helping elect Black women to every level of leadership. If you want to follow us, please follow us online. You can visit our website to see our full slate of candidates at electblackwomenpac.com, or follow us on social at that same handle. It is a pleasure to be here. I have been on both sides of the table. I have been a candidate for state house, as well as a campaign manager to a United States Senate candidate who shocked the world and won the Democratic nomination in a conservative state. So I'm excited to be here and to not only share the stage with my fellow panelists, but to do everything I can to support candidates running to make a change. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Ruby. Chris, you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Shanti. Hi, everyone. My name is Representative Chris Matthias. I'm represent District 19 out of Boise in the Idaho House of Representatives. That's essentially downtown Boise, the northern foothills, and then a little bit of the north and northwest kind of Burby areas. But I'm really excited to be here because unlike Ruby, unlike Sarah, I'm not as informed on larger political landscapes, larger political trends. You know, I live in the center of government in a big state, and so I don't have that type of perspective as much as I'd hoped. However, I was able to incorporate some of what happened in last night's elections into some of my responses. So I will weave what happened last night into some forward-looking kind of actionable information for everyone. So thanks for being here, and I'm really excited to be here.
Great, I'll take that as my cue to pop in. I'm Sarah Pope, my pronouns are she and they, and I'm here representing LGBTQ Victory Institute. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that focuses on supporting LGBTQ folks that are interested in either policy or being involved in electoral politics. So we support folks through trainings, internships, fellowships, various leadership conferences, and opportunities for folks to develop their skills so that they are prepared when they take that leap to run. So very excited to be here with folks, especially the day after the election. I'm amazed that we're all here wide awake. I know I had quite a lot of coffee this morning, but am excited to say that while there were some disappointments on, personal level or different candidates that I have my eye on, we're really excited to see a lot of historic firsts yesterday. So we now have representation in the New Jersey state legislature. New Jersey was one of 6 states that didn't have any LGBTQ folks in the state legislature. So this is a really exciting thing. There were some first non-binary candidates elected. So someone in Massachusetts for Worcester City Council. We had our first non-binary person elected to a judicial position. First Black LGBTQ person elected in Montana. So all in all, while there were some kind of substantial losses, I think for a lot of folks, it was really exciting to have some of those great wins of representation. So excited to talk about how we can get more folks into office, and excited to learn from both Ruby and Chris as we have this conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. It's nice to hear some rays of hope. I don't know, Ruby, if you guys, you or Chris have any reflections on the election before we dive into what we're here to talk about today. Would love to hear that.
Yes, and thank you, Sarah. Like Sarah mentioned, lots and lots of incredible firsts. And so we had women on the ballot in Georgia, Pennsylvania. We were supporting India Walton and South Carolina, and also women in Virginia. And so I think the high level reflection is that, people of color are running and winning. It can be hard, right? There are definitely some challenging races out there. But I think the tide is turning broadly in terms of folks voting for candidates that don't fit a certain leadership archetype. And I think that's the headline that I'm personally walking away with. And we saw a historic number of Black women elected to judicial positions in Pennsylvania. Now, we didn't take the statewide judicial seats like we would have wanted, but we did see women who are now going to be serving pretty long terms, right? So you're talking, 6, 7, 8-year terms in some cases. And so when we talk about the reforms we want to see in the judicial system, Pennsylvania is now showing us the way. Louisiana, did it, a few years back, Texas. And so we're starting to see more and more outstanding Black women who are attorneys running and winning in places, where we need them. And so that's always a highlight. The other is that we're effectively seeing Black women and candidates turn back the tide on racist attacks. I think that that's always really hard when you're on the campaign trail, you're doing everything you're supposed to do. So Kendra Hicks' victory in the Boston City Council race is just a good example of that. Her opponent got real down and dirty unapologetically in the last 6 weeks of the campaign, and she was still able to walk away victorious. And this is a Black woman who's Afro-Latina. She's unapologetically both a Democrat and a socialist. And so those are the types of things that, we're excited to see, because again, we want to see folks who are proximate to the issues running and winning. And let's be very clear, she had a great campaign team. And so we also saw Shanice Turner Sloss, let me make sure I get it right, who won in Dayton. Again, her community was one of the ones that made the news in terms of police brutality. The gentleman who was a paraplegic drug from the car, that was in her neighborhood. That was 2 blocks from her home. And so she won her county commission seat again, facing very, egregious racial attacks, but persevered and was able to win. So I would say that's the headline, is that if you're a candidate who potentially has, attacks like that coming your way, there are exemplars right now of women and individuals, people of color, who've persevered and found victory in those types of challenging races.
Shanti, I would just add, that I can't add to that. And I got my notebook right here because it's still in here. And I'm still in the process of trying to interpret this data. And so I'm excited to hear more from Sarah and Ruby about what they're seeing. But I do have some thoughts on what happened last night, but I'll couch them in the context of some of the things we'll discuss.
Okay, great. Well, with that, then we'll dive in here. So I want to just say thank you to our speakers today. It's the day after an election. So we are recording this. So I hope everyone's okay with that. And we're going to post it on the LCB website. So it will get a bigger audience, but we're really excited about the folks who are here today, who are thinking about running for office, and hopefully this will be helpful for you. So let's see here. So just what is LCB? We build political power for people on the planet. So we exist to influence policy, hold politicians accountable, and win elections. This is how we fight to build a world with, I'm sorry, I've got to move my little bar here, with clean air, clean water, public lands, and safe climate protected by a just and equitable democracy. So that's a little bit just for folks who don't know too much about what LCV is. And then what we're trying to accomplish today is we want to help our potential candidates prepare for a future campaign by sharing some important preparatory steps. We want to introduce future candidates to some organizations that you're going to get to meet today that might be able to help you with your candidacy. We want to share how the answers to these questions we're going to talk about today influence the success of your campaign and help you evaluate whether you're ready to run. And then we're doing this because we want our candidates to have the best possible chance of success. And so we only have a couple people on, so we have time for folks to, if you'd like to come off mute and share your name, personal pronouns, where you live, and what is one hope and one fear you have about running for office. And then for our speakers, maybe you can share one hope and one fear, or sort of like what is the maybe a lesson that you have from either running in the case of Ruby and Chris, or Sarah in the case of supporting lots and lots of, your organization supports lots and lots of other people to run. So let's see here. How do I, if you would like to unmute yourself, you are more than welcome to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'll go.
Go ahead.
My name is Janice Richards. I live in Houston, Texas. and I'm running for State House in my district. It's District 130 out of 150 districts so far that we know of in Texas, because Texas has apparently not quite completed its redistricting. But let's see, she, her, and I hope that I can present at least one major issue that's salient enough to get myself a voting base. And I don't really fear anything other than I believe that our population has purposefully been manipulated and treated in a very low intelligence, simplistic, low expectation, low providing for the population way. And I'm thinking that I would like to see people start pulling, and really on a fear basis, I would love to see people start pulling out of the fear basis. So my fear is that the fear basis might be great enough to still hold us back, but my hope is that we can start talking with each other in a personal way and overcome that.
Thanks, Janice. Anyone else want to introduce?
Saria, how you doing,
Hi,
Shanti?
Saria. Good to see you.
Yeah, my name is Saria Ben. I really don't use the pronouns, but I can use them. She. I live in Aberdeen, Maryland, at Harford County. I don't really have any fears because I was severely attacked by a strong Dem machine in 2018 when I ran. I ran on a shoestring budget, came within 67 votes of winning. I'm running again. I've not stopped running, to be honest with you. Believe it or not, I've amassed a lot of support locally, which is kind of good. But the thing is that one of my massive, I think, fears is that even though I've amassed a certain amount of support in my area, that because we have a certain amount of voter suppression, that enough people won't come out and vote in the next election. Because even my opponent, who's a Democrat, was censured for calling another county the N-word, an entire county, the N-word. And so although she was censured for it, people may have forgotten. And so my fear is that not enough people I can get to explain to them that, one, and that she hasn't also done a very good job legislating. So that's really my main fear, but I'm doing all I can to inform the voters that I'm the better candidate, that I'm going to be a very transparent candidate. And I'm really trying to get more organizations to support me because we are a marginalized community, predominantly Black, Latina, and AAPI. So we have the vote to vote for me, but we've never historically ever had that type of representation. And so it's a matter of getting the financial resources and people behind me, but it's just been one of those situations where it's just never, ever broken that, proverbial ice. And so that's really my main fear, is just trying to get people and getting that support, because always there's been a predominance of energy and support behind the gubernatorial race, and that's the same thing that's happening right now. People see what happened in Virginia, and so now they're fearful in Maryland that the same thing's going to happen again. And so the attention, and then one last thing before I stop talking. Andy Harris is a big issue in my district as well. Even though he's not directly in my district, he's in my county. And so a large amount of the focus becomes about him and his race. And so people tend to forget my delegate, Marianne Lasanti. But what she did was so egregious, to be honest with you. And she's really suppressing our area where we're getting no representation at all. So that's my fear. But I do believe I'm still going to beat her nevertheless. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, then we will hear from our speakers. And I don't know if any of you would like to just share some of your lessons before we keep moving here. Ruby, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah. So I would say, one hope that I have is, as candidates continue to step up, particularly candidates from marginalized communities, just understanding like our American electoral political system is just that, it's a system. And I think it's just really challenging when you're a first-time candidate to really sometimes wrap your mind around, okay, I'm running to be a part of a system that is, keeping people safe, a system that is providing clean water, and it's not about us. Because when you're the candidate, it's your name on the yard sign. It's very easy to be like, what is it about me, me, me? But when I think about candidates who come out the gate, who are really able to do coalition building, my hope is that, more first-time candidates realize it's about the community, how well you message your we message, because an I-focused message can make it difficult for people to come along with you versus a we-focused message makes it easier. It definitely can make a difference in coalition building. So that's my one continued hope, is that first-time candidates really have a we-focused message, because it's easy to have an I-focused message, but it has its own implications for coalition building. And I think the one fear that I would say I have about candidates, particularly again, marginalized candidates or just Democratic candidates running for office, is just the underestimation about the CRT conversation and how not knowing strong policy, because school board raises.
CRT means critical race theory.
Yes, thank you. Critical racial theory. Not really having an understanding of that policy, like educational policy, is really going to make it difficult for folks to speak to a conservative in their community, because Fox News and more conservative news outlets are really pounding the messaging. And we saw that in Virginia, where the Toni Morrison ads ran, and we are starting to unpack the data, but we realized that it actually did have implications. People are now, oh my gosh, Toni Morrison is not the type of material we need our children reading. And so the underestimation of the critical racial theory conversation, its heavy emphasis on conservative news, is impacting down ballot candidates. And I'm just concerned that particularly first-time candidates or even candidates who've run before are going to get out there with messaging, and they're not going to really understand why that messaging isn't resonating. And again, it kind of goes back to the we versus I beliefs. And right now, that's a very big we conversation. And I'm worried that, first time and novice candidates in general are underestimating that.
Chris or Sarah, anything you would add about a hope or fear you have about folks running for office today?
Yeah, I'll pop in. My hope and fear are kind of around the same topic, and something that we'll dive into a little bit more in our discussion today. But anti-LGBTQ attacks have really been on the uptick. We've seen more anti-LGBTQ attacks in recent years than over the last decade. And so it's kind of like my hopes and my fears are both tied into that, where my hope is that we'll be able to really figure out ways that we can better support LGBTQ folks who are running to, figure out how to message around these LGBTQ attacks, or figuring out how can we even kind of eliminate or reduce them, so that folks are having fewer attacks based around their sexual orientation or gender identity. But then it's a real fear that many folks have, where I had someone give me a call the other day, and we chatted for a while about how he was really concerned about running. This is someone looking to run in Mississippi potentially, where the only person that he knows who is an out LGBTQ candidate, this was not super recent, but the only person who ever ran in his community was an LGBTQ man who then ended up being murdered. And so it's, that's the really extreme case of an anti-LGBTQ attack, but these are really the realities that folks have. And as someone who's a trainer and talks to folks about the skills they need to run for office, kind of creating that formula, we can only go so far, and the support that we can provide. We can say, these are some of the ways that we found successful. These are some of the ways that we think you can mitigate it. But at the end of the day, the only way these types of attacks will stop is if those who are kind of, perpetrating, or, the ones that are doing the attacks stop. And so figuring out how can we support our candidates so that they can be as authentic in themselves as possible, and have, that hope and that optimism while they're running. And so I think it's really a tough conundrum. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of the factors that we have our folks consider when running, and some of the kind of skills and background we give and the support we provide so that folks aren't doing this alone. But definitely it's an area that I think really peeks into the emotions when you think about it.
Yeah, I agree. And Shanti, I would just add that, my fears for first-time candidates are not necessarily unique to being candidates. I mean, if you are non-binary, if you are Black or brown, if you are poor, you've been dealing with these attacks and you've been dealing with this hate your whole life. And so nothing about running is going to change that other than you are prepared to handle it. Maybe not the uptick in intensity or number, but this is something you are prepared for. I am hopeful for the same reasons that Ruby mentioned, which is more of us are running, more of us are winning, and more of us are giving a voice to those people in the systems that we're talking about. And until there is greater and accurate and proportionate representation, the circumstances are going to be unfortunate for a lot of people. And so I am more hopeful than fearful, and that's why I'm excited to be here today, because I think if first-time candidates are fearful, we can address some of that fear right here today.
Great. So with that, we'll dive into some of the questions that we want folks to consider before they run. And so the first one is, how will a campaign impact my other obligations and commitments? And so this is about your job, your family, and all of that stuff. And I think, Ruby, you were going to tackle this one first, and then we can have Sarah and Chris chime in. But these things are important to consider, and we hope you'll just tell us a little bit about why that is.
Yeah, thank you for that. So in terms of your campaign impact on your other obligations and commitments, this is a thankless job, and it takes a considerable amount of time. I think probably one of the things that continues to surprise folks, even if you've been elected, is just how much time it takes and how much stuff you have to do outside of just legislating, right? And so whether it's the drive up, if you are serving in state legislature, to the Capitol. If you don't already live in the capital city, you have to think about that. And how do I safely get up there and back, right? And am I in a place in life where, like, I have children, so my children are under the age of 6. I ran for state house. The state capitol is 3 hours away. One of the things I take into account is, fortunately, my husband's family is from the state capital, the capital city. And so I had to have a conversation with them. Like, when I win, right, and I come up, can the kids be at the house with you? And so you might have to have some conversations with family, extended family, again, to just make sure that, because for your children, plates keep spinning, they keep growing, soccer games, all that stuff keeps happening. And you want to make sure that you're good as a parent, a spouse, partner, with the amount of time that you're going to be away. And also the phone calls, you're going to get calls all times of day and night. If there's any type of natural disaster, whether it's within your scope of your elected role or not, those are all things you will want to think about. And then lastly, like your work obligations. There's a reason why people from marginalized backgrounds tend not to be in elected office, is because if you have a job where you have to be there at work to be compensated, then you might even have to, decide to run several years out so that you can have enough time to pivot into a career where you can still pay your bills. And so those are some things I always encourage candidates to think about before you announce, because once you are an announced candidate, and when I say announce, I mean, like, whether it's an appointment of treasurer paperwork, you've opened a campaign account, whatever active candidacy means in your state or in your city, it's hard to roll that back, right? Because that time is gone, you're now active. And so active candidacy can impact obligations directly. And so you want to ask as many questions. There is no such thing as an underground campaign. I've heard candidates say that. It doesn't work. You got to be out loud, proud, I'm running for office. And so you want to make sure you're telling as many people, because again, it'll help tease out any conflicts of interest. And then in terms of who will support me, the one thing I tell people is you got to have a network in a community.
Oh, Ruby, pause for just 1 second. I just want to have see if Chris or Sarah had anything about this first question. Sure. I know, Chris, I saw your wife on your campaign materials. And so I know that spouses and partners play important roles in campaigns. So I don't know if you guys wanted to talk about the importance of, like, making sure your spouse or your partner is 100% on board, and the different ways that spouses and partners contribute to campaigns.
Yeah, thanks, Shanti. And Ruby just mentioned, we're talking about the family component. And I think considering how this will impact your time and all of your other commitments is important. But so far as my wife and my children are involved, I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old as well. And I think there's also an emotional component to all of this. Even if you make sure, even if your daily calendar is perfect and tight and you're going to be everywhere you need to be and you're going to get all the things you need to get done in a day, when you're sitting down reading to your daughter, are you actually present? Or when she's telling you about her school day, are you actually present? Or are you emotionally drained because of the intensity of campaign related activities? And so I would just add that that is another kind of axis to consider. In addition to time, think about the emotional components and whether you're mentally going to be in the places that you know you need to be. But so far as families are involved, I think one of the things you have to think about in advance is, how involved does your family want to be? Posing in some campaign literature might not that be big of a deal, but do they want to be part of campaign videos? Do they want to knock doors? There's a lot of, grading of intensity for potential involvement for family. And that's something that you need to think about in advance to make sure that your expectations are aligned before you press go.
Absolutely. I just have a couple of things to tack on before we hop to the next question. I'm excited to hear Ruby's thoughts on that one. So a couple of thoughts that can apply, I think, to everyone who's considering to run for office, and then something a little bit more specific to LGBTQ folks who are running. Something that we always really make sure folks are considering is when it comes to employment, are you in a position that you can either take time off or be part-time? As Ruby and Chris mentioned, campaigning takes way more time than I think you really think it will before heading in. And I think for folks who have even been campaign staff, it's so different being the candidate versus a campaign manager. When you're a campaign manager, you will do many hours, of course. No campaign manager ever has said, I'm not working enough. But the candidate is always the candidate, as Ruby was saying. So if they go to the grocery store, they are still the candidate. If you're the campaign manager, people don't know what you look like. You're not on the materials. So you're able to kind of clock out a little bit. Whereas with folks who are running, they're always that person. So really figuring out with your job, is there any conflict here that if I'm running for office, can I still hold this position? If I can't, can I take time off and have my position when I come back? If you have your healthcare connected to your job, which the majority of Americans do, that's another consideration where if you go to part-time, can you keep your healthcare, especially if you're a caregiver, a parent, or if you're taking care of someone with a disability, really ensuring that you have folks who can either take on those duties for you or that you're able to maintain that kind of support and structure, no matter what kind of leave of absence you take from your job. The advice that I would give to LGBTQ folks in particular relates to something that Chris mentioned, where he said, you talk to your family about how much do you want them to be involved. And for us, we take it a little step further and say how much in the public eye do you want to be, especially spouses and children. Given that there is this uptick of anti-LGBTQ attacks, there's going to be attacks on families that are not the traditional family, even though we know there is no true traditional family. Every family is different. But people will find ways to criticize or critique your spouse. You're going to get really intrusive questions about you. And so we always encourage our candidates to really prep their family members, sit down with them and say, someone might ask this really invasive question about my body parts, and really having either an answer that they can give, some sort of messaging so you can pivot and say, one of my favorite examples is Delegate Danica Roem, who also just won her election last night. Super exciting, longest serving trans legislator in the country. But she has this really great example that whenever she was, when she was campaigning, canvassing, when she would talk to reporters, they would say, as the first trans candidate, and she would say, as a trans candidate, I'm also impacted by traffic, which is the biggest issue in my community. Trans people get stuck in traffic too. And that was her way that she was able to pivot back. But if she hadn't had those conversations with her family members, if she hadn't talked to friends, they wouldn't know necessarily that that's the way to pivot back. So we really encourage our folks to sit down and say, these are probably the really inappropriate questions I'm going to get. This is how I'm going to answer them. Do you want me to mention you? Do you want me to even show the children? Things like that, just because there's some added risk with folks from our community.
That's great. Thanks, Sarah. So let's see. Are you going to dive in, Ruby, on the second question about who can support you as a candidate? And then I'm sure Chris and Sarah will have some additional thoughts.
Yep. So the piece of advice that I like to give to candidates, whether you've run before, first time, is, always start with the places where you serve right now. You go to those folks first because that's who you've been working alongside. That's who you've been volunteering with, kind of in the trenches with, and they tend to get a little hurt if you don't ask them first. And so you always want to go to your core group of folks because that's where your fundraising is going to initially come from. And don't leave anybody out. Ask everybody in the same way because believe it or not, people can interpret it as you don't like me as much because you didn't ask me. You're doing this really big thing in your life and you didn't even ask me. So ask everybody, even people who you're like, oh no, my grandmother, this is not a good time for her. She's been sick. Ask her the same way. Would you like to help on the campaign, Nana? Ask everyone close to you first. People you volunteered with. The other thing I would say is, be mindful that before you announce, you might need to join some new organizations to make some new friends. Because, again, that's where your initial base of support comes from. Once you become an announced candidate, it's really easy for people to say, well, the only reason you're asking me is because you're running, if they don't already know you. And that might hurt your feelings. It's not, but again, we're having a we conversation, not an I conversation, right? And so the more organizations, networks, communities, and ecosystems that you can be a part of before you become an active candidate, it just increases the number of places you can, authentically go and ask for help, because the more people you can get on board before you announce, the better. With that, I'll kick it over to my colleagues on the panel.
Great. Yeah, I'll pop in to say similarly, after you kind of look at your core group, after you're looking at the organizations you're involved with, after you've done kind of your political work, talking to the local party, if you want to go that route, or saying, they're supporting this person, so I'm going to go with my own campaign that's kind of against the party. You really want to look at, just who are all these people in your life. Like Ruby said, you don't want to assume that someone can't give. Some folks who I think of a story that Victory, our CEO and president, is the former mayor of Houston, Mayor Anise Parker. And one of my favorite stories that she tells is from when she was running for mayor in Houston, and she was thinking about folks to ask. And she had someone in her neighborhood who was unhoused. And she just said, no way am I going to ask. That's, a breach of asking someone for support when they're in a position where they clearly are unable to give. And this person came up to her and said, why aren't you asking me to donate money to your campaign? And this woman became a monthly, sustainer as a donor for her campaign. And the amount that she was donating was, a couple of bucks a month, but everyone wants to be included. Everyone has investment in their community. And so I think that's something that we sometimes forget, that the folks who are most marginalized within our community have the most at stake and are the folks that might have the best ideas or the best understanding of what are the gaps of what needs to be fixed or filled in a specific community. And so these are the folks who really can kind of be in your corner. And so that's always my advice, to not overlook people who might need the most support in your community, but then also might have the best ideas of how to bring support.
And I would just add, pretty much everyone is going to support you somehow, some way. And the ones that don't, most of the time they won't tell you. If you call and ask for support or ask for a contribution, they're more likely to just go radio silent on you than to call you up and break up your friendship. I haven't lost any friends. So I just want to echo what the other panelists said. Ask everyone, and I think you will be pleasantly surprised where you will find support and in what forms that support will come.
Yeah, and I would just chime in that sometimes people some people will give in different ways. You might have somebody who will make food for your volunteers every weekend, but they're not going to give you any money. My coach was like, no, I'm not going to give you money, but she made all these amazing introductions for me to people who actually did give money and held house parties and things like that. So you just give people a menu, right? Tell them these are 3 ways that you could support me. And obviously the money is the most flexible, right? But we do need people to feed our volunteers. We do need people to deliver lawn signs. We do need people that can contribute in a variety of ways. So, and then also just to kind of make this a little bit more concrete, Ruby said you start with your closest circle. But for some people, that's going to be your church. For some people, that's going to be a board that you're serving on. I was on the Library Advisory Commission in Oakland here before I ran for school board, and everybody on my Library Advisory Commission gave me money. 3 of them hosted house parties for me. You know, a few of them also door knocked for me. So you just don't know. You know, you might think, oh, I don't want to bother people, but like they said, they like you and they want to see you succeed, right, in something that you care about. So you know, it could be your kid's little league, you know, parent roster. You just never know. And so that's why you want to tap every single network that you're a part of. So thanks guys for that one. I think this is the most important. If you don't take away anything else from this call, having a strong fundraising plan is the foundation of every good campaign. And so you don't have to be able to match your opponent's dollar for dollar, but you have to be able to be competitive, right? Okay, so Sarah, I think you're going to dive in on our next question, which is what's on the internet about me?
Sure. And so this one is definitely a tough question to dive into because so many folks, when they say, you know, I'm thinking about running, but I know that I had a Tumblr back in late high school, early college, where I might have said some problematic things. Or in the case of the LGBTQ community, we have a lot of folks who were formerly unhoused or participated in survival sex work or sex work by choice as well, since that's an area where you can often be your own employer and don't have to worry so much about restrictions around gender identity, around sexual orientation, and being your authentic self. And so often a lot of folks will use that as ammo against you. We'll say, I found this live journal entry from 2012 in which you made a witty little comment, and now we're taking it out of context and putting it, you know, in an attack ad and saying that you are a pervert. And this was an experience that one of our candidates did have, where he had made a joke about child pageants, kind of a satirical piece about them that he had done when he was in college. He fast forward, he's in his 40s, completely forgot what was in that journal entry. And then it was on ads for a statewide race for a federal position. And so it's hard because you really do need to do your best to kind of scrub the internet and see what are, you know, those easy negatives that someone could come up with me. But of course, who remembers their specific handle from when they were 18 and they're now in their 40s? You're not going to necessarily remember that. And so sometimes they can be a little bit of a surprise. So we tell our folks to really think about, how can you message so that you can take what is potentially a negative and then pivot it so that it can be a positive, or it can be associated somehow with the goal of your campaign. And so in the case of someone who potentially worked in sex work prior to running for office in years prior, we say, you know, if it's something that you are ashamed of, then feel free to say that, and you can use that as your pivoting point. But for many folks, they're not ashamed of it and shouldn't be ashamed of it because it was purely how they were surviving or choosing to make their income. Either of those, you know, is an acceptable choice, but it's how you message it. And so really being authentic and saying, this is something that happened, but I'm running for office because there's other people like me who cannot go through traditional methods of work, are unable to pay their bills. I'm running so that I can help make it easier, or to help so that this is decriminalized. So figuring out how to really align it with your policy so that it doesn't really become your detriment. Instead, it can become a moment of relatability, a moment of vulnerability to say, I have experienced this, but in taking these experiences to serve my community, and really bringing it back to kind of the mission of the campaign, because I think that's what is kind of a combination of this point with who will support me, is really saying, you know, this is who I am, this is who I have been, but I'm not afraid of that. And I'm really about this mission or this goal that's bigger than myself. So the money that you're providing is for this ultimate goal of the campaign, to improve our education system, to improve our access to the workforce, for criminal justice reform, decriminalizing sex work, saying these various policy platforms, and then saying, this is my lived experience, this is what I learned from it, and this is how we can move forward. That doesn't always work. In the case of the candidate who had something as benign as a live journal, it was made into an attack ad that was really, really successful. And enough folks bought into the idea that, you know, he was a pervert, that he was a pedophile, all of these things, which, is of course absolutely not true. And then it ultimately did lead to him losing his race because it was in a purple state where there was enough, enough votes for the other candidate. But he was able to at least maintain his dignity and his response and able to say, this was something in the past that was made in jest. I'm really interested in moving forward and doing what's right for my community. So it's really about that messaging and saying, how can I take this and respond to it in a way that's authentic to myself, but then also pivots to the future and to the goals of my campaign.
Thanks, Sarah. Ruby or Chris, anything to add on, what you did to prepare your digital footprints for your campaigns?
Yeah, definitely. Yes. Scrub, delete those old Twitter handles. It ain't worth it. People are like, what is the story of my life? I'm like, delete it. If that is not who you are, because humans, it is okay to evolve. It is okay to change. It is okay to have a different perspective. If that is not who you are right now, delete it. Go on Facebook, hide those pictures, and then ask like your little cousin and like 3 younger friends of yours who are always on social to go through your profile and see what they can see, because you might think you've changed the settings, but you haven't. But these are things you also want to do months before you run, because it takes time. Like if you've been on Facebook, so let me go back. Let me tell you, if you are an elder millennial, which means you were born in the early 80s, you have been on Facebook a long time probably. So you need to like go hide, make private, like don't even say, I want to share with certain friends, make it private so it's only to you. So it's your memories. And then ask some younger friends, cousins, colleagues to go that you trust, to go and look and see what they see. And then have them screenshot it and send it back to you, because you may not realize it, but it can take, depending on how much you post, it could take hours, weeks, months to clean stuff up, which is why I tell folks, you got to choose at a certain point, if you've been on a social media platform for a long time, to like whether it's worth it or not, and just delete it. But at the end of the day, don't be embarrassed about who you are. Like people can't shame you if you accept who you are. And the bottom line is like, you also are going to be living in the public eye. So people are going to get to know you. If they don't get to know you during a campaign, they're going to get to know you once you're elected. And so your most authentic self at some point, it may not come out to all of your constituents, but it will like start to show, right? Because there's only so long a human can keep up a facade. And so you want to be authentic, and not to say you should be unapologetic, but there are aspects of you who like, that's just who you are. And so you don't want to present yourself as something that you're not. And so like for me, I went to the University of Florida. It's an SEC school. I love college football. So if people find pictures of me at college football games, like having a great time posing with Albert or Alberta, I'm like, I liked college football, and so that's what I did. I would go to football games, and that's not something people can ever make me ashamed of, even if they, they root for the opposing team in the SEC, right? There are just things that, that's just who I am, and I'm proud of who I am. And so again, scrub the stuff that, if it's not who you are, it's not who you are, delete it outright. And if it is who you are, just don't let people embarrass you by it. There's like, when you go through candidate training, there's like usually a box, it's like 4 squares, what's the messaging I have about myself? What's the messaging I have about my opponent? What do they say about me? What do I say about me? It's like this whole grid, and you can
Chris,
Google
you remember that from our Candidate Academy?
And so everyone trains on it, but do that exercise, because the other thing is you got to have to build up some resilience, because even the things you're not embarrassed of about who you are, let's just say you're someone who's experienced divorce, and depending on your faith, that might be an issue. And so if you're not used to talking about it publicly, then people can make you feel bad about it. And what happens is human nature to be like, well, and to get defensive. And that's the thing, you don't want to get defensive. Like that's the reaction that you want to try to avoid. Whatever is out there about you, you want to get to a place where you can talk about it, you can own it, but don't get defensive, because the moment you get defensive, you start to get emotional. And that's where, if you have a particularly tight election, that could be the misstep at the wrong time. That could be the difference between a couple hundred votes of a win or a loss, particularly if you're in a purple community or a close primary, a contested primary. So at the end of the day, whatever is out there, even if it takes you by surprise, resist the urge in that moment to get defensive. Just take it to the chest, own it, take personal responsibility, and, figure out some messaging that you can say that doesn't make you seem like you're avoiding the issue, but also, just, you got to be able to kind of absorb the shock of it and do that well.
Chris, do you have anything? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was just going to tell a story because this actually just came to fruition last night. But in Idaho, the largest cities have always had essentially all at-large city elections, and this was the first year where we were forced to break the city up into districts, and so you just ran to represent your district on the city council. And there was a gentleman in my district, so I probably live in among the bluest, if not the bluest district in Idaho, and a gentleman decided that he was going to run for city council against an incumbent who's my friend Lisa Sanchez, Latina that I've known for 20 years. We're both student body presidents at Boise State, and we represent big chunks of this district. And so he knew that he wasn't going to be able to be a pro-Trump Republican and win. So, and I never saw this, but I was told that early this year, in the depths of winter, when no one was paying attention, he went into his Facebook and he removed all his Trump stuff, and he really tried to clean up. He did what you're supposed to do. Well, about 5 days ago, someone kept a back and forth they had with him in the comment section that they had kept, and they released it, and they revealed him to be this birther, gross, pro-Trump kind of guy. He's free to have those opinions. That's not consistent with the values of our district. So to put a finer point on some of the things that Ruby and Sarah said, when you're looking at your digital footprint, there are going to be things that are embarrassing, but embarrassing is not necessarily bad. The question that you have to ask yourself is, does this reinforce my values or my brand? If there is an arrest record of you, being arrested with heroin, but you happen to be running 20 years later on a platform that includes, trying to reduce the amount of funds going to the police and use some of that money to go into mental health services and anti-addiction efforts, well, then, that piece of evidence and from your digital past is not necessarily, might be uncomfortable, it might be embarrassing, but it can be helpful. And with the right planning and thinking, and as Ruby said, owning this stuff, I think it doesn't always need to be an anchor in ways that we might think. And I will also add, as someone that was born just before the 80s, I never had social media accounts until my campaign. And so I decided, back to the fundraising issue, to just raise funds and hire a social media manager who is proficient and competent in ways that I cannot be.
I think that's sound advice if you have the money.
Yeah.
But bottom line, if you don't want to see it on your opponent's mail, anti-you mail, then don't leave it online, right? All right, Chris, I think you were going to tackle these next two, and of course, Ruby and Sarah can chime in. But you got to have good answers to these questions, right? Why now? Why you? And then also thinking about, sounds like the folks who are here have some thoughts already on what office they should run for. But Chris, I know you had some thoughts on how to make that decision.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the calculation that I went through, and I'll flip those two questions. How can I best serve? What office should I run for as the context for why me, why now? When I went to ask my campaign treasurer, if she's a high school government teacher, very well respected in my district, I asked her to be my campaign treasurer, and she asked me that question, why you? And I actually pivoted over to the what office should I run for, and I explained my reasoning. And my reasoning was this: we've all seen the book. I was a volunteer and an officer in my county party beforehand, so I did a lot of candidate recruitment, a lot of door knocking for other campaigns, and we've all heard and come across that book, Run for Something, which I think is a really important book. Because it's true, there are those of us that don't see ourselves in positions of elected office, and it's very important that we get rid of that false perception of self, and we do need to think about running for something. But I went one step further after my experience at the county party and realized, well, I didn't want to run for anything. I wanted to run for something that when I won and the campaign was over and the cameras were off, I was still going to get out of bed every morning with that same level of enthusiasm to do the job, because the job was going to be fulfilling. It was going to draw down on both my passions and my skills. And the thought at the time, for example, of running for a city position or a county position where I was going to have to negotiate municipal waste contracts or something like that, that didn't tug at me in ways that I needed a position to tug at me. But state government, I wrote my doctoral dissertation on state law and policy. I served the state as an employee. I just love state government, and I love the lawmaking process up until statutes, up before causes of action, which are the things that attorneys need to practice. I love all of that. And so when I was asking myself, what should I run for? I said, well, what is going to make me the happiest and fulfill me the most and use the things that I know I'm the most committed to, and that is state government. And that's kind of how I started reasoning myself into a legislative position for me would be the right position. And so once you know and can answer the question, why are you running for this specific position? It becomes a lot easier to articulate why you are the best person and why this is the right time for you. And the right time gets back, to the beginning of our conversation today. It gets back to, this is the right time for my family. This is the right time for where I am in my professional career, or I won the lottery this year and I can afford to do this. Whatever the reason is, I think putting that in the context of why this position is extremely important.
Other reflections, Sarah, Ruby?
I can pop in with just one of my favorite kind of anecdotes in the campaign world about why you should have an answer to why you or why now. It's truly my favorite example. It's very evergreen. Senator Ted Kennedy was running for president, and he had a TV interview where they said, "Why are you running for office?" And then all of a sudden he didn't have an answer. And so this is someone that we know as a very influential senator, part of the Kennedy family, where you would think he had the best campaign consultants, the best staffers, people who were in his corner telling him exactly the formula to at least have a viable campaign. But for whatever reason, he didn't have an answer to this. And even though he could have most likely been president if he had had an answer, this was what really took him out of the running immediately. And so for any folks who are running, I always say, don't run because you want to be the first. Don't run because, in the case of last night, we had our first non-binary judicial person elected into a judicial position. We had our first non-binary person in Massachusetts. This is very exciting, but what are you past that? What are you past being a first? Why are you doing this? And it's about, why do you want to serve the community? How can you improve the community? Really have that answer, or else you're going to be in that position where you don't know what to say and you're kind of stuttering, and people will say, well, if you don't know, why would I vote for you? And so really saying, don't be Senator Ted Kennedy running for president, arguably the position where I think people know the most why they want to run. So think about every election as you are going to be interviewed on national TV, being asked why you're going to run. Have that answer prepped, because people will really understand you and support you and believe in your authenticity if you have a really good and true answer to why you.
Yes, and you're going to get it asked it over and over and over again, and you can't get frustrated by that. Like, why are you running? Or why are you running? Or why are you running? And it's going to have all kinds of tone and undertone, and you can't make meaning of it. And to what Sarah shared, it is great to be the first. It is great to be the youngest. It is great to be all of those things. But identity politics doesn't resonate with every voter. Some people are like, I want to hear your policy position. And when I think about, and I'll use Kendra Hicks, who just won in Boston as a good example, she had the most in-depth policy positions I have seen for a candidate running for municipal office in a very long time. I mean, it was just, I think she had 16 issues on her website, because the variety of things as a elected in a municipal district in a city like Boston, you are going to have a lot of stuff. And she was very clear on what she wanted to accomplish, why, what that would look like, how it relates to her lived experience. You got to do your homework, and I think that's the thing that I really, push candidates of color on. Like, it's one thing to have a compelling message. I grew up in this background. I have this. and to tell that compelling narrative. But when that is over, or if you're talking to a voter where that's not their lived experience, or it doesn't resonate, then what are you going to talk about? And it's like, you got to speak to the issues. You know, if you're running for federal office and you cannot explain the American Rescue Plan or the Build Blue, you know, if you cannot explain federal policy, that's going to be a problem. That's going to be a problem. If you are running for state level office and you can't talk about, you know, state level issues around education, you know, what's currently coming through the legislative session, what bills passed, what's your perspective on those bills, you're not familiar, that's going to be a problem, because you are going to have voters, particularly people who are donors, consistently engaged in our political party. They're watching that stuff. That's how they enjoy and spend time. And so, you know, you really want to do your homework, because at a certain point, identity politics just stops. It cannot take you all the way there. And the other thing is, it can insult people at their door. If you come and you're like, you know, I'm running because I'm an educator, and they're like, well, you're not running for school board. So how much can you do to impact the educational system based on the position that you're running for? And if you're not clear on that, or you're incorrect about it, they're going to just say, okay, well, thank you. And they may turn and say, you know, they may be the family where jointly they come together and look at the ballot and decide who they're voting for, and they treat it like the Oscars or the Emmys, you know, and so you don't know that. And, you know, or they could be a potential donor and you don't know that. So at the end of the day, you have to have messaging that goes beyond just your identity, your political affiliation, and that goes into policy. And it must also be on your website, because why now needs to also be easily found in writing, whether it's on your palm cards, your door hangers, your Facebook ads. That all needs to be consistent, because you can't have a different message everywhere with different groups of people. It needs to be consistent. That's going to be really important.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Municipal waste contracts notwithstanding, I think there is a lot of, I mean, as a school board member, right? Of course, I would say this, that there is a lot that you can do wherever you land, right? Whether you're on a school board, you know, on our school board, I have been able to fight. I'm a person who cares about the climate, right? And the environment. And even at a school board level, you know, you can influence your purchasing policies, the amount of local and organic food your school purchases, electric bus fleets, solarizing and weatherizing all your buildings. Like wherever you land, you can do good stuff. So if the state is the right place for you, that's great. And if you want to start at a local level, I would say that's great too. Like wherever you land, if you're motivated, you can do important policy work. So, okay. Lastly, guys, where can our folks go to get good candidate training? You guys want to tell them about some of the resources that either your organizations use or offer, and then I'll share a little bit about what we offer at LCV. Sarah, you want to start?
Sure. This is perfect timing. We launched our applications for 2022 yesterday. So at victoryinstitute.org, we have a tab with all of our trainings. We have what are called candidate and campaign trainings. These are 4-day boot camp style trainings where we introduce folks to how to build your roadmap for running for office. So building your campaign plan, really going through each of the elements, going through the nuts and bolts of running for office, as well as really looking at what is office, you know, what is running for office like as an LGBTQ person. So we go through those anti-LGBTQ attacks and how to message. We go through the experiences of past LGBTQ elected officials by having them join us and share their experiences, have them on a panel. We show sample mailers and different materials that can help show the best messaging and how to kind of pivot from the intrusive questions. So this is one of the very few trainings at a national level that focuses just on LGBTQ candidates or staff that are supporting LGBTQ candidates. So very excited to have any folks who might fall under that umbrella join us. So our applications are available at victoryinstitute.org.
Sarah, maybe you can drop that link in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Chris or Ruby?
Yeah. So, you know, I'll let Chris do the plug for LCV. But my recommendation is, so I have had the privilege of going through a number of candidate training programs. So I'm going to speak to a few. So the one I love, if you're running for federal office, is the campaign school at Yale. Ms. Patty Russo and her team are phenomenal. I was a part of the 25th class, the 25th anniversary class, and it was just really powerful. I would say if you're running for federal office, it's now open to anyone. It was the women's campaign school at Yale when I went through it. But if you're running for federal office, that is the place to go. So you think about Congresswoman Lauren Underwood as an alum. I mean, Johanna Hayes was one of the speakers. Congresswoman Johanna Hayes was one of the speakers when I went, and they train on both sides of the aisle. So if you are someone who you're like, like some are just for Democrats, some are just for Republicans, you can be whatever you want, apply and go there. The other thing is it gives context on what, electoral training looks like around the world. And so I was in the classroom with a woman who was, fighting for Australia to get its independence from the Queen. And so you're able to talk with people like, wow, like, tell me what that's like, and so it also helps contextualize it. Again, that's why I think if you're a federal candidate, it's important to go, because if you don't understand geopolitical, and international, relations and what's happening around the world, you need those types of relationships and context, because you may need to understand what is happening in a country, on the other side of the globe. And so if you're a federal candidate, I highly recommend it. And then also just the caliber of consultants and folks in there, they're used to working on presidential campaigns. And so those are some good people to talk to, especially if you're thinking about running for United States Senate or Congress, because that is a whole different ballgame than, state level or municipal office. The other that I recommend is, the National Democratic Training Committee, or the NDTC, currently has their applications open for Staff Academy. And so never underestimate, it's great to go through candidate training, but your staff needs training too, particularly if you're running for down ballot office, where most of your folks are going to be volunteers, people who love you. They might be unpaid staff. I'll drop that link also in the chat, but they've extended their application until November 7th. And so if you are thinking about running in 2022, you need to have everybody who is going to help you, who says they're going to volunteer, apply, because it's really great training. The NDTC also has excellent on-demand resources. So if you don't know how to write a fundraising plan, they got a template. You can just plug and play, campaign plans, et cetera, timelines. I use quite a bit of their materials when I'm training, particularly candidates, that may not be in a big city. And so getting to a candidate training in person might be hard. You might not be able to, it might not be within your budget, but the NDTC does have a ton of free resources and on-demand content that you can watch. And then the last thing I'll share is, there are organizations like Emerge. There are 24 affiliates across the country, so there's not an Emerge in every state. But they always are doing, candidate boot camps. They just did a judicial boot camp here in our state. And so they're just doing a remarkable job of helping women get connected. And then it's a national network that you can be plugged into and talking with folks. So the short answer is, before you announce, go through all the training available. It's better to do it over time, because you'll see something in one training that'll be reinforced in another training, that'll be reinforced in another training. And that becomes your mental cue, like, oh, this must be really important, because all of these organizations are talking about the message triangle, or all these organizations are talking about fundraising plans. And that's really important when you're running for the first time, because you may want to believe you can kind of cherry pick and choose. But let me be very, very clear. When you're working with top vendors, consultants, they do have unspoken expectations. And if you as a candidate are not knowledgeable about those expectations, like call time is not optional. People want to know how many hours you're dialing, how many pledges you got in, what's your cash in, cash on hand. That terminology is not optional. And you might feel like, well, I'm not running for a really big race. Well, your race could heat up and become a high dollar race or a very important race, and you have no control over that. So, again, going through programs, making connections and building relationships, it can only help you. It cannot hurt you, but it does get challenging if you try to do all of that candidate training once you've announced, because then you're out the gate and people have a different set of expectations to you. But I'll drop all of those in the chat.
I would just, I would add a final observation from in my experience. So first of all, I wouldn't even be here if it was not for Conservation Voters of Idaho, an LCV affiliate in Boise. And I went to their training It was a 4-hour training, and a couple months later, it snowballed into getting an application for Shanti's training. And I think that snowball approach to finding training is very helpful. The thing I particularly loved about LCV's training was the fact that it wasn't just sit and get. We got a lot of time to role play and practice. And so one of the things that I would share is, don't do too much training if it means you're not going to do enough practicing. Practicing and role playing is extremely important. If it's just sit and get training, don't do too much of that. Spend time focusing on your weaknesses and turning them into strengths. For example, one of the things I found out was that phone time, as much as anybody doesn't want to do it, call time actually ends up being a great chance to do two things. One, catch up with old friends, so long as you don't spend too much time catching up. But two, it gives you a really good chance to practice your why me pitch. Because at some point you're going to realize, oh, I got to get 10 calls in and I only have 20 minutes. So these are going to have to be quick. And you get right to it. You get really efficient. And when you get efficient, it becomes less awkward. It becomes less robotic and becomes more natural. And that is a transferable tool. It doesn't matter if you're knocking doors. It doesn't matter if you're at a house party. Being able to really back your way into that why me pitch is really important. So I guess when it comes to training, don't train too much, but make sure you practice and focus on your weaknesses. Don't do the things that are just comfortable to you. Really do the things that are uncomfortable to you, because once you get all these pieces of the puzzle, all these gears in place, it really becomes smooth, and I hate to say it, but it becomes fun. If you really believe in yourself, if you really believe in the position you're going to run for, then this process can be fun. And I think that really brings out the best in you when when it's at least not miserable.
Yeah. I don't know if fun may be a little too far, but it can't, the calls can be fun. I mean, it can be fun to catch up with people.
Shanti, I would say, I probably use that term. I'm a pandemic politician. I've never had a house party. I've barely got to knock on doors. So all of this has been within the comfort of my home. I mean, this is campaign headquarters. This is legislative office. This is everything right here. And I think when you just get in a flow of something, it becomes less burdensome. And I think that's what I mean by fun. It becomes less burdensome, and it just becomes smoother and kind of second nature. And I think that's what I mean by that.
Yeah, but testing your message, you are on point about that. It is so helpful to just see what resonates with people, be able to hear the same questions over and over. And if you get started early enough with your call time, by the time you're getting those questions and endorsement interviews, you're just firing on all cylinders. So okay, so now we have time for some Q&A. And so I'm going to take people off of mute or whatever, and folks can just dive in with your questions, any questions that you might have for our panelists. And if there are no questions, then we can just give you back a little bit of time. Let's see, Janice, you're off mute. Go ahead.
Oh, I just went off. I don't have a specific question. Okay. Other than just to repeat what I wrote, can I please get a copy of this with the chat?
We are videoing, and that will be posted on the LCV website. I guess I can copy and paste the chat into some kind of document. Sure.
Thank you, because that'll include the links that I never can get during a call.
Yep. Any questions that any folks have for our panelists?
What is the process? This is Saria Ben. What is the process for trying to get an endorsement through the Victory Fund? Would it be going through the training? Because I know that a lot of the organizations want you to train prior to applying. So what would be the process?
Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. So Victory Institute is our 501c3 arm. So we're the nonprofit side. So we focus strictly on training, internships, fellowships, various leadership development opportunities, and our conference for folks who are already elected. We really focus on those convenings. But our sister organization is Victory Fund. So Victory Fund endorsement is not contingent on participating in our training, but I would recommend some sort of training. And I recommend ours for LGBTQ candidates since we really tailor it to folks who are LGBTQ and are able to provide really tailored advice. Our consultants that are our main trainers, as well as our staff, we've all been in this field for quite some time. Our trainers have been training with Victory for over 20 years, so they really know the lay of the land. They specialize in mailers, especially. We have trainers from both sides of the aisle. We have folks who have run local campaigns, federal campaigns. So I really encourage you, if you are an LGBTQ candidate, to join us at one of ours. And I'm happy to follow up and chat a little bit more about what we cover. But Victory Fund endorsement is not contingent upon ours specifically, but they do look at, how solid is your campaign plan? Do you have all of those elements that the trainings that various organizations like those that Ruby chatted about also cover? So really looking at, do you know your vote goals? Do you have a solid plan for your call time for fundraising? Really, are you looking at those factors so that you have this viable campaign that has the framework to succeed? Of course, campaigns are a bit of strategy and luck, but is the strategy in place so that this is a viable campaign that would likely win? So those are some of the factors that they're looking for.
And you guys are going back to in-person training, Sarah, for this next round?
So for 2022, our first training of the year is virtual. We wanted to be sure to include a more accessible opportunity for folks who might not be able to travel given, caregiver status or given immunocompromised. My brain is putty after election day. For those that are immune compromised, we do not want you to put yourself in a dangerous situation to join a training. So we do have a virtual option for our first training of the year. And then the following 3 are in person in varied places around the country. Our first in person will be in Atlanta. Our second will be in Philly. And then our third is in Portland, Oregon. That way we can kind of hit some of the various regions. We try every other year to hit alternative regions. And so we're happy to host folks in person or virtually. We have our application online and I'm available, and my email is on the website to answer any questions, but I'll drop that in the chat as well.
Yeah, if folks are interested, I would highly recommend an in-person training if it's safe, if you feel safe doing that. Just because, we did our first Candidate Academy in person right before the pandemic struck. And so that's the one Chris got to attend. And Saria got to attend the online one. And it's just not the same. You don't have as much time, so you can't go as in depth. You don't get the same opportunities to practice. And as Chris said, that was a big part of what helped him. And so, for what it's worth, and people have to do what's right for them. But if you have the opportunity to get in-person training, I highly recommend it. I'm hoping that we'll be going back to in-person in February. It's going to depend on a lot of policy stuff at LCV. It's above my pay grade, but we'll be doing that in the Midwest. So hopefully we can pick up, Sarah, some of the folks that you guys won't be able to pick up. Okay, any other questions? All right. I am so appreciative, Sarah, Chris, and Ruby, for this time with you. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. We will be opening our Candidate Academy applications probably around December 1st. So we'll be doing that February, maybe President's Weekend time frame. But thank you so much, all of our panelists and folks who attended. Really appreciate you guys having sharing your time and your wisdom with us.
Thanks for including me.
Oh, sorry. I had one more slide. Sorry, that I wanted to share, which was just our sort of closing out wisdom here. Uh-oh. You guys see it? Well, okay, here we go. So the last things we wanted to just share is that the foundation for every successful campaign is your fundraising. So if you don't take away anything else from this call, go and make your fundraising list. These are, try and get a list of 200 or 300 people that could contribute to your campaign, not just money, right? Maybe they have a business or maybe they can host you for meeting space or something. Talk with your boss, right? We talked about this, your partner, your children, about running for office, and what can you do to commit to them that they are still going to be priorities. And then research options for candidate training. And again, LCV is one option. So and here's our stay in touch slide. If any of you want our contact information is right here.
I can't see it.
You can't see it?
All I
Oh.
see is a white screen.
Let's see
Maybe
here.
it's just
Bring
my
your
computer.
shared window to the front.
I don't want to miss a thing.
Yeah.
I got to model this. I don't want to miss a thing.
Why isn't this working? Sharing is paused. Bring your shared window to the front. Okay, resume share. I'm not sure why it's not working. Stop share. Okay, share screen. Okay, now can you see it? Okay, good. So here's our contact information. Please stay in touch. And you can just take a screenshot of this screen because I'm gonna have to take it down in a second here. But thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, and stay in touch. Bye, everybody. And I will save our chat because I said I would do that.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
And bye.
Okay. Let's see.